We're going to get started. Thank you all for coming to this meeting today. The reason that we invited so many is that this project that we are about to talk to you about is probably one of the more complicated projects that John Carroll has ever taken on. And note that I say John Carroll, not IT, although it certainly is one of the most complicated projects that IT has taken on as well. Understanding who our people are on campus and in the campus community and our information systems has been a challenge for us throughout. Now, it doesn't sound quite right. I mean, don't we know who we are? Yes, we do. Obviously, we know who we are in this room. But in terms of a systematic way of assigning roles and identities to people, that is still has a ways to go. And it is absolutely critical that we get a handle on this, given the way that information technology has been moving in the last few years, with systems integration being more and more common, with things moving to the cloud, with the extra emphasis on security. So that's part of the reasons why we asked you to come today, and there's going to be a lot more detail about that as several folks from IT are going to share this presentation with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he'll start us out with the actual presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I want to start off by saying a lot of us in the room, this is kind of like, didn't we do this before? Look at Barb, we've talked about identities and how do we get this to work 2 or 3 times now. This is a very different process as you watch. If you haven't been engaged before, I think you're going to see there's a lot of pieces to this, as Mike talked about. For those who have been engaged in these conversations before, I want you to understand it's a very different approach that we're taking this time. We've tried before in many different ways to get this to work, and it just wasn't going to work for various reasons, which we understand. I'm not going to belabor them, but I do want you to understand this is a different approach, and this is a funded project. So I don't expect that you're going to see something tomorrow. Ryan's sitting back there, he's laughing. We have tried in a lot of different ways to make it work better. This is going to take a couple of years. This is a 24-month project to get this to work. It will take us a long time talking to one another, as you'll see, before we get to a point where we're actually going to pick the technology that's going to make this happen. So at the end of the day, it's not an IT project. It's IT enabling this process, all the processes we have across campus, to work better so that you get access to the technologies. So hopefully that kind of makes some sense. So let's talk about what is ID management, because in the past we really haven't necessarily approached it from an ID management perspective. It's been a username perspective across lots of different machines. So identity management is providing the ability to give the right people, can you guys see me standing there? The right access to the right systems and information at the right times for the right reasons to enable the right business outcomes. So you think about things like, I just became the department chair and I need access to stuff. That's the right person getting the right access to the right systems at the right time. They leave as chair, somebody else becomes chair. An identity management system understands the role of the person, takes that person out, puts the other person in. And if you think about that for a minute, all the different things that you would touch in different roles move to different people. Very complex. That's why there's so many people in the room, because we need to touch so many different people. So for every person at the university, we need to figure out, who are you? Why are you here? There's a lot of different roles. The demographics, and just a few of the things you get assigned. Your network username, your email, everybody gets those. And then from there, it's all over the place. If you're in HR, you have access in people admin. A lot of people wouldn't. If you're in student life, you have different access. Linnell access, etc. So how are you affiliated? Are you a faculty member? Be a staff member. What is a staff member? We're going to talk a little bit about some of those things. And then you're going to hear the term affiliation a lot. How you're affiliated determines what kind of resources you get access to. So this is, if you were down this path with us before, you may recall we tried to get Banner to do this. There's a whole lot of these people here and a whole lot of these roles and affiliations that don't even know Banner exists and don't care. That's part of the reason we weren't successful. This system sits outside and over and above all of those other systems so that it can interact with alums, it can interact with parents, it can interact with vendors who will never have any access other than a card that gets them access to the room where the vending machine is, so they can fill the vending machine. Whole different animal. And it's all based on your affiliation.
No.
And now it's John.
No, actually, no, Steve.
All right, so why are we doing this? Jim mentioned some of the pain points already. So first one, user dissatisfaction and confusion. At the beginning of the semester when the students come back, we're flooded with password changes. Same thing when faculty come back over the summer. Enabling a password self-reset function would be huge for us. What we're stressing is, people have a number of different accounts. Yes, we have tried to make them look the same, so your Gmail account looks like your campus domain account looks like whatever else account. But as you know, your password is not synchronized between them, so you have, there's different times when those passwords change between Banner, Gmail, campus domain, whatever other systems that we're looking at. So we're trying to eliminate the confusion. When someone says, I can't log in, I'm locked out, it takes a while to figure out exactly which account they might be talking about. Lack of consistent definitions for affiliation. So as Jim was saying on the last slide, what is the fill in the blank? What is an applicant, and when does an applicant become a student? When does a potential hiree become a faculty member or a staff member? Are they a part-time or are they full-time? These are all the definitions that, we need to have, documented and across the board. A fragile account provisioning process. Right now, within IT itself, we have 3 different groups handling accounts. We have the Banner group, we have my group doing the systems, and we have the help desk doing accounts. So there's a lot of manual hand-holding going on. Sometimes accounts flow automatically through the system. Students primarily, employee accounts are manually done. Sometimes it's through a file, sometimes it's through an email. There's no set way all accounts are created or modified. And information security. Every year the university gets audited. IT is also audited. If someone asked, for a login history for my account, I couldn't just go and produce that from one system. I'd have to go to Gmail. I'd have to go to Oracle from Banner, and I'd have to go to the campus domain. We don't have a concise set of tools to perform our security. If someone is changing roles, we have to know what they have rights to, how that's tracked, if they're allowed to send to a mailing list or not. All of these kinds of things, would need to be tracked through an auditing system as well.
There are Dave's account got hacked, just trying to figure out what somebody may have touched.
Mm-hmm.
Virtually impossible to.
And with the phishing scams and security breaches, this is more important every day for us to consolidate under one identity and have the systems feeding off of it, rather than us chasing down a whole bunch of different identities. So, project goals for this. These are the goals that we've come up with. A single JCU network ID. So this is not your Banner ID. This is not your campus domain. This is a John Carroll ID that works with all of the other systems. That's the change that we're looking at. A single sign-on authentication. We've tried this a couple times. A single sign-on page. We looked at Campus Pipeline a number of years ago. We looked at Luminous. We started making progress on something like that. This is one of the goals of this as well. but it will be based on this single identity again. So it will eliminate the need for having different system-specific passwords. It's building that security that I talked about and trust. And as we move to more hosted systems, hosted being not here, but like Gmail is hosted for us, and all of these services, we need to tie into what they're not going to change for us. We have to accommodate what they provide. And multi-factor authentication, we're going to touch on that a little bit more later, but essentially that is the ability to have more than just your password be your access into your account. Whether it's a text code to your cell phone, if you've set up your home banking, you answer security questions, you pick an image, things like that. User-friendly, secure web-based self-service tools. This is one of the biggest things, as I mentioned, having the ability for users to change their own passwords, whether it's on a Sunday morning and no one's at the help desk to do it, or whatever time of day or night, students, employees, you can change your own passwords. University-wide definitions for affiliations and roles. This is going to be repeated on a whole bunch of slides. Every department here has their own understanding of who these different people are. A student to Res Life and a student to the registrar hopefully would match, but there might be a little, couple small differences. So we're going to try to make them consistent across the board. Elimination of custom written scripts and manual processes. This is what I was talking about, where when it comes to creating and deprovisioning accounts, there's a lot of manual work being done. And better tools to audit the security of the environment, which I think has been covered too.
We should say, while we're doing this, if there are questions, I don't see any real puzzled faces yet, but if you have questions, ask them while we're talking, as opposed to getting to the end, maybe you forget what you wanted to ask. This will not succeed if we're not all working this together. So we definitely want you on board and want to make sure you know why we're headed where we're going.
All right, so I'm going to deep dive a little bit more into single sign-on, why it is so important. So I troll around on several of the sites that we have accounts on. You might kind of see the problem. There's no branding. Well, for those, he's telling me to get closer to the microphone. You have no branding, or just inconsistent branding, or complete lack of branding. The integrated marketing people get the shakes about this. But more importantly, with all of these different sites, some of these don't have any branding at all on them. Some of them, white text on a black background. There's no consistency in any of these. The user doesn't know when they look at a login, it just says username and password. First of all, they don't know what username and password to enter, but more importantly, how do they know that website, that login page is safe for them to enter their credentials into? We are making things way too easy on the phishers, the people who come in to steal the credentials of our user base. Because, they can literally put any page up in front of the user and they'll say, sure, and just enter their credentials. We want to avoid that. Oops. Sticky. There we go. So, goals around single sign-on. We need to build that user trust. Which in turn leads to a build-in security. By combining brand consistency, an easily recognized host name, so login.jcu.edu, for example. A piece of technology called an extended validation or an EV encryption certificate. So if you've ever gone to your bank and noticed that the address bar in your browser turns green, or has a certified or that kind of notification on it, as opposed to just the little encryption lock, that's an EV cert in action. Basically, what this is the certificate authority not only says, yes, we grant this certificate and the certificate is valid, but also goes to the effort to validate we are who we say we are. And by us using that certificate, the browser says, you can trust this web page as being who they say they are. Phishers can't do that. They may be able to encrypt the page, but they can't go to that extra layer. This also gives us a nice place to plug into multi-factor authentication. Dave touched on this a little bit. Google Authenticator is probably the most common one. I know a few people in the room use that already. But basically, as opposed to just requiring a username and password, there's an extra step involved. You can go. It's traditionally determined by what you know, your password, and what you have. So a cell phone that it can send a text message to, a desk phone that it can call, and you hit 1 to log in, 2 not to. There's a lot of ways to implement this kind of thing. And from a training perspective, we really want to teach our users, if it's not this login page, don't ever enter your network, your JCU credentials into it. That's probably the most important thing to prevent phishing on this campus. Without that single sign-on where we can truly say that, there's always that doubt in the user's mind whether it's okay to enter an account name into a system. This will be a phased approach. Obviously, we're not going to be able to put a single sign-on a given single sign-on interface on top of every system on day one. Some services will be easier. Some services are designed around it. Google, Canvas, OnBase, the low-hanging fruit. Luckily, all of those are already designed around having this kind of capability, even Banner. But in all cases, it's very important that we work with the vendors that provide these services. These aren't the kind of implementations where we can just kind of walk up to a service and glue it on the front and it'll work. The vendor involvement is extremely important in all of these. So, how do we get there? The all-important question. Well, people first, then process. Without addressing who is using the system, who is responsible for the data, and the processes by which all of these individuals combined work through the system, are we capable of defining it? And only after we have these in place do we want to touch on technology. One of the easiest ways for a implementation like this to fail is to, I have a tool. Let's stick it in, and that's going to solve the problem. Sticking single sign-on into the environment without fixing all of these other issues doesn't solve the problem. It lipstick on a pig sort of thing. The people. And to me, this is probably the most important thing. That's everyone in this room. It's really everyone at the university. We have our policymakers. Who determines what the rules are that we follow? Who determines the rules that for determining these affiliations? HR, registrar, alumni affairs. The list goes on. The data stewards. These are the folks that actually, on a day-to-day basis, interact with and manage the data of the university. The system owners. In some cases, these are going to be within IT. In some cases, they're going to be external, like Google. And in some cases, they'll be external to IT, like the library system, or the housing system, or Linnell, or Heartland, which is our card swipe system. These data owners, system owners are across the university. And of course, vendors. We're going to have to engage these vendors as we move forward. And then, of course, the core project team, the 5 of us that have kind of started this process within IT. However, as we move forward, this team is going to grow to encompass people from all of the other categories. It's the only way, as Jim and others have mentioned, the only way to really for this to be successful is to make this a campus-wide effort. It's all you.
So I'm going to kind of talk about the process a little bit of an identity management system. In an identity management system, how the process would work is you would go to a front-end interface and you would be able to make changes to either your account by requesting access to certain systems, or you could request access to systems on behalf of someone else. You can request that an account be created for a new user. What would happen then is we would provision those identities to the back-end systems. Banner, Active Directory, Google Apps, Slate, etc., through an automated process instead of the processes that we piece together today, which are kind of automated, kind of manual. You might have to go to a form over here to request an account. Some stuff automatically gets done. Sometimes you got to send an email. I know Barb generates spreadsheets sometimes to try to figure out who's coming back. So we got all these different systems. So an identity management system would empower the university and give them an easy interface to use to get what they want when they want it for new people and people changing positions at the university. In order to achieve that, again, we've got stuff, processes in place now that we've pieced together. So those processes are going to have to change on the back end by us, and they're going to have to integrate. Those systems will have to integrate into the identity management system in an automated way. But third point, most importantly, in order to get this to work, we have to define the affiliation of different users at the university. We have to define what is a faculty member, staff member, student, alumni. And that sounds easy, but it's a little harder than you think. Part-time versus full-time, active, inactive. And we need to document this, so we need to make sure that everybody is on the same page as to what it means to be a part-time faculty or part-time student or active or inactive. What is active or inactive? So this is kind of the process that an identity goes through in an identity management system. At the top you can see that when a person comes in, the identity is created. They're affiliated with the university in some way. And then during the enable phase, what we would do is we would enable that person to access the various systems and services that they need access to. And then in the exit phase, when somebody leaves the university, you deprovision them from all the systems. You remove all the access that they shouldn't have anymore. And while that identity is within the system, you've got different processes around that identity. You may have to disable that identity temporarily. People retire, so you would mark them as retired. There's provisioning new identities, password changes, different requests to that identity. Say that you change your name, you change your last name or get married or something. You would put in a request to change that part of your identity. And then modifying access. So say you change departments and you need to change the rights that you have to the various resources for the department share, and stuff like that. You would go to the identity management system and change your rights that you have, or request change to those rights. When somebody puts a request into the identity management system, it would also go through a process within the system itself to get authorization to make that change. So somebody may request access to something that they don't have authorization to access, or they're not authorized to grant to themselves. So a request to go to the person that owns that resource. So for example, if somebody wants or needs access to the department share, what they would do is they would request access, or somebody would request access on their behalf. That request would go to the department chair, and the department chair would then approve that request, and then the identity management system would go through the process of changing the rights for that person, or provisioning or deprovisioning them from the system that they need access to.
One of the other things I want to add to what John's saying here is that this also allows for an identity to have multiple roles or multiple. So a staff member that takes a class can be an employee and a student. A person could be an alumni and a retiree. And so they'd have rights to certain things as a retiree, they'd have certain rights to certain things as an alumni. Those identities will stay in the system after they have graduated from the university or left the university as an employee. So, it's not one identity, one position or role. It's multiple things, but only one identity.
Right, you can kind of think of it as an identity is created but never destroyed. So, you know, you may come in as, not that this happens at the university ever, but a student comes in, they graduate, they become an alumni. So, okay, they've lost the student affiliation, they now have an affiliation of alumni. Well, they get hired by the university. Well, now they're an alumni and an employee and a staff member. You know, it's that the idea that once your identity is created, that identity follows you through your entire life cycle. All the way through, you know, for an alumni affiliation never goes away. That identity is still there. So that if you know, so it's unlike the way we do now, where a student leaves and comes back, we basically destroy old identities, start anew. Getting away from that, so you can really build upon your affiliation with the university.
Question. The identity management systems could handle multiple affiliations, but will our underlying business systems like Banner, housing, security? So Kara, who works for Marty, she's a graduate student and a staff member in the faculty office. When she logs into Banner, using her identity, who is she? So I guess the question is, would Banner or those other existing business systems be able to know, oh, you're Kara the student versus Kara?
The way Banner works now is when you log in, well, it would essentially work the same way it is now. It's just Banner does not currently have that concept to it. So when you would log into Banner and you would go into the secure area, you would see things that are associated with your let's say you're an employee and a student, you would see your student information and your employee information. I can't honestly say that we have a lot of cases where that happens right now.
Well, you're saying Banner self-service.
Banner self-service.
We're talking about Banner forms, which is slightly different.
Which is slightly different. Students generally do not have access to Banner forms.
But in this case, the student does.
If they carry a role that
Yes.
allows them to have access to Banner forms, then they would get access to Banner forms. In a general case, access is assigned by affiliation. Students have this list of stuff. Staff members have this list of stuff. You would simply, in this case, create a university affiliation. Obviously, you don't want one affiliation per one person type of thing. But you also have to have enough flexibility in your definitions to allow for that kind of thing to happen as well.
So the answer to your question is today, no. That's why it's a two-year project.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, it's serving on it, I'll just ask it a different way, but does identity management in an HE system to system flow to rights within the system? And I think that we're talking, so if someone needs access to a given Banner form, is that still Banner security, or because then you're getting to samples of one where we call Charlotte now and say,
Right.
this person needs access to these three forms and these three functions. So the in-system security, does this get you to that level over
Yeah.
time, phase 7?
Yes.
Yeah.
It really depends on the identity management. What you're getting into is what's called identity and access management.
Right.
Which is one of the trees under the general identity management concept. It really depends what tool we end up with. Some support that layer of detail, and of course then you also have to make sure the systems themselves support that level of detail, which is probably the trickier part.
But the core phase 1 is clarifying roles and system access, not this deeper layer.
Right. Well, step one is defining the affiliations,
Right.
by which then we determine access. So,
To the
yes.
extent we can go as far as we can go, we are going to do that. Some of those, like Banner, that example is not easy. So probably less likely than other things, like home directories, department directories, things like that might be easier.
A lot of our systems are already knit together with Active Directory. So to use what like Tableau understands Active Directory already, it's integrated with it. So we provision an account, it creates an Active Directory account. That Active Directory account gets put into the Tableau users work group. So the identity management system is not necessarily going out and touching Tableau, but it changed Active Directory, and Active Directory granted it rights within Tableau. So it trickled through that way. So if that helps, it's not necessarily going to touch every end system, but it will work its way through.
How does this impact, connect, relate to VPN and access software?
VPN is just a service. Depending on your affiliation, does your affiliation allow you to access a VPN as a service? Is really the answer.
And right now, the VPN is integrated with our Active Directory, so once again, it would flow through there. If your Active Directory employee account is disabled, then your VPN access would be cut off. As a student, you might have VPN access to student systems or something. So it would know which group you're in.
I'll ask it in a different way.
Of course.
There are certain university systems right now you can get to without needing VPN. Does going to identity management change IT's confidence in authenticating who someone is, that you're going to be assessing which systems you can access from off campus and not?
I would say
Steve,
not
is that a friendly
necessarily.
to your question?
I would say not necessarily, because
Okay.
security is very much like an onion, and we have different layers.
Yeah,
That's part of what you're seeing there.
yeah.
As if we were to move Banner into a different vendor, different hosted model or something, that might change that.
Would that impact Argos, same sort of thing?
Potentially.
Everything touches
Yeah,
everything.
but-
That's why this is so complex.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
So
We have to identify every system,
Yeah, yes.
and we'll probably overlook a couple, and we'll get reminded.
These are good questions. Keep
Yes.
them coming.
Some of the challenges of banner forms, Argos, others are not coming to mind right this second, but is that they require applications to be installed on the PC. Argos, we're actually in the process there's actually going to be an upgrade coming within a couple, 2 or 3 weeks, that actually is going to add a web viewer capability to Argos. So to start eliminating the need for that end client. Future ERP was likely to be much more web-based than it is application-based. So we're going to start seeing those kind of things, and we'll start eliminating the need for that extra layer of security based on the fact of how the architecture of that application is defined as well.
Continue on.
Yeah.
All right, so to kind of sum up the four important points going forward of the future state of the process, all identities will be created and managed in the identity management system. Instead of having identities all over the place in all of these separate systems, there will be one place for identities, and that system will be responsible for provisioning and deprovisioning identities on all the separate systems. All the downstream services would be provisioned. I kind of just said that. Single sign-on, multi-factor, we would have single sign-on and multi-factor authentication for all the different services. So there's single sign-on is where you go to a web, you bring up your web browser, and you log in once. Google's a good example. You log into your Gmail account one time, and then you can go over, click on the calendars. Instead of logging in a second time to calendars, it just passes you right through. In Google Drive and all the different Google things out there, you sign in once, and you can get into everything. How that works is it stores some information on your computer, and it passes that information automatically. So one of the goals is to enable that for as many systems as we can that are capable of that technology. Multi-factor authentication, what that does is it adds a layer of protection in front of your account. So for example, if you log into Gmail, what you would do is perhaps get a text message to your phone with a number that you would type in, a PIN, so that instead of you just contacting Gmail to log in, Gmail will come back and contact you because it knows about you, it knows who should be logging in, and it's going to verify that that's you through that process that's logging in. And that'll help prevent phishing. Because if somebody gets somebody's username and password, you're going to know something's wrong because you're getting a text message and you're not trying to sign in. So you're going to know something's wrong if somebody else is trying to use your account. So that'll prevent them from getting in because they shouldn't get that text message. So that'll help secure our systems. And then the fourth item, we need a system. The system will be vendor supported and automated. So we're not going to home grow anything. We need something that's off the shelf, like Banner, an off the shelf product that many institutions are using. Of course, and it will need to integrate with our different systems. So we need to find something that works with Banner, Active Directory, Google, and so on.
So we talked about the people, the most important part. We talked about the processes. The technology follows that. So there will be a certain set of options that we have once we define what it is we're trying to do. So to the point where Brian asked about can it get into Banner and reset things. If that's a core piece of what we needed to do, that's going to define the technology. So technology looking for a problem is never a good way to do it. We are coming at this from the people and the process standpoint. So when you look at this, and we'll talk a little bit more about the phases, talking our way through these processes, understanding how they interact with one another, what HR does with hiring somebody and what the provost's office does with hiring somebody, there are interactions. We have to understand those before we can figure out what is the best approach to solve that. It will be a software as a service, as John talked about. It will likely be hosted outside of the university. As we move further down this process, our identities blur so much these days with you use different resources inside the university, outside the university. There's a concept that we haven't talked about here called federated identities. There are many schools that federate back and forth. So if you go to Ohio State and you have a federated identity, they see you as you walk in with your John Carroll credentials, you would get access to anything that they would determine in your role you could have access to. This becomes a much larger process as we trust one another more and more amongst the institutions. Makes your life a whole lot easier as you move around. So that's why we're looking at this as a service. You see these 5-6 vendors here are actually the core vendors in this space. It's actually a much better defined space now. So when we talk about the fact that it's actually a budgeted project, we have a lot of hope that this is going to work. There's a lot of pieces here as we're all sitting here thinking through all the different pieces we touch. But there are systems out there that are doing this today for the Ohio States and for the Baldwin Wallaces and for the University of Akron. So a lot of different sizes, but these will fit for us. What fits depends on the conversations about the processes that we have. Once we figure that out, we will put together a proposal, send it out to any of the vendors that are viable, and we'll see what does that mean in terms of what can they offer us, what is the cost, what's the implementation. We're building for the future. So we're asking you to stick with us. It's going to be hard to get these definitions going. At the end of the day, I think we'll probably agree to disagree on some of the definitions. That's the documentation John talked about. We're going to document what is a student, what is a part-time student, what's a full-time student. We've been trying to figure out graduate student, graduate assistant. We still can't figure that out. I've been trying that for 30 years. So we're going to document what we best configure it is, and that's what the system's going to provision based on. You can look at the document. If you don't agree, then maybe your systems do some different things based on the fact that you don't agree with that definition. But we're going to have to define those things. That will take time. So stick with us. If we build a good foundation here, then over this time period, we're using Banner now, we're talking about Argos, a lot of different tools that are here today. They may not be here by the time we actually implement this in 24 months. But we're building a system that we can easily plug things into and pull things out of, so that as it grows with us, it'll be much more seamless. A lot of heavy lifting between now and then. And so every one of us in the room, oops, sorry. Every one of us in the room is going to be engaged with that. We're going to drive this from the core team and drag other people, hopefully willingly, in with us, because I think you're going to see the benefits. You know, if you're HR, if you're in the provost office, huge. We're never going to toss out the part-timers anymore. They just change roles in the identity management system. Makes life much easier. So we're going to evaluate. These are not equal in terms of time. Step one, evaluating the existing processes, a long time. A lot of processes, a lot of things going on. RFP and vendor selection shouldn't take all that long, quite frankly. If we've done our homework and we've defined what we're doing, that becomes much easier. If it's hard, we didn't do our job right, and we're going to have to go back and figure that out. So then we're going to, in stage 3, figure out, okay, what is this low-hanging fruit? You know, Google, Banner, Canvas, what are the things that touch the most people? And we're going to integrate all of those into the self-service tools and the single sign-on first. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to have everything ever in this system. There will be some outliers, some systems maybe in facilities. I know IT is going to have systems. You know, Dave probably has 100 different usernames and passwords to get into all of our different systems. You don't care about those. There's probably 10 that really touch the majority of the people. That's what we're going after. So we'll take all of our identities, all of the information we know, load that into the system, and get that up and running in stage 3. Then we're going to go back and we have to change all the processes we have now. So there's a lot of different processes that trigger different ways, all these broken processes we talked about, you know, where there's manual processes, some of them are automated, some of them aren't. We need to go back and fix those so that they work with the identity management system, so that when you hire somebody in HR, and it knows that that person's a chairman in a department, it triggers the identity management system to go back and do all the things that it needs to do. So that's going to take time on the IT side in the back, and that's step 4. We want, once we get this thing, we want to be able to benefit from it, and everybody just being able to go to one single sign-on and remotely change your password and all those things we can't do today. That's phase 3. What do you think? What are you concerned about? What did we not tell you that you have questions about? Brandon?
Are the various sort of, I saw that vendor list there. Is each one of them sort of doing everything their own way, or are they relying on, defined standards?
All of defined standards are going to be are extremely important. We didn't really dig into the technology standards around single sign-on and federation, CAS, SAML, WS Federation, for throwing out lots of random words that don't make any sense to most people. But absolutely, this has to be a standards-based approach. Pure and simple. We cannot have anything. None of those vendors are communicating with external systems in their own way.
Couldn't have done that good a job.
That step 1 of process, and which I put in that defining students, defining X, and you kind of alluded, it's not an IT process, it's a people process first. Do you have a sense of committees, people, configuration? Is that starting tomorrow? Is that a summer task? Is that a fall semester task? So just that next step is sort of like you're putting that as the first domino even before an RFP process. So
Absolutely.
just curious timeline, and if you already have an idea that here's a group of people that are going to define student, and here's a group that will define what a faculty member is and such.
We have ideas of those. That core team has been talking about this for a good 3 or 4 months, really, maybe longer, to figure out who needed to be in the room for this conversation. This should have been about 3 times this. It's really a hard topic to get people excited about. So we're hoping you'll take back this information and get some other people excited. You know the ones who you interact with who should have been here. So we're going to come back. We started, you may remember back a few months ago, we talked to a bunch of different people and said, who's important in this process? We documented all that. So the next step is we're going to start calling those groups together. Some groups will be here over the summer. We definitely will hit those as soon as we can and start to do this. We expect, like I said, it's funded now, and Jennifer will start whining at me that we haven't spent the money fast enough. But in fact, it needed to be at a point where we could do this, so it's not, we're not going to rush it. It will take time. We do know who those groups are. We're going to expect you to tell us where we're wrong and bring as many people to the table as we need to. So we will go group by group to define these things, and then some groups are going to cross over and we'll combine those groups until we have all the information that's necessary and everybody shakes their head up and down and says, yes, this makes sense. I agree, let's move forward.
The trick to this is going to be to achieve a balance between inclusion, in other words, having adequate representation, and being able to make decisions in a timely fashion, which is always the biggest challenge. My experience with these kind of systems in the past and other institutions I worked at have been mixed. For example, at the University of Wisconsin, where I was for about 20 years, the entire 20 years of my time there were spent on trying to figure out who a student was and who a faculty member was. We don't have that kind of time, and I don't think they did either. But I think this institution is a bit more cohesive, and I think we have really good thought leaders around this table. I think we should be able to get to those definitions fairly quickly. And by that, I don't mean tomorrow, but certainly within the next 6 months or so, I would think we would have a pretty good handle on who a student is and who a faculty member is and who a staff member is, which really are the big three. Would you agree?
Alumni.
Alumni, okay. Big four.
Yeah, there's a-
Retirees.
Grows fast. Any other questions? We thank you for your time. We thank you for all the work. We know you're going to be engaged with us.
You'll be hearing from us.
Okay.